More sackings at Arsenal. People going left, right, and centre at the club at the moment, and we're going to talk about it all and get your reaction in our live chat as well. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Raw Reaction series, show in which we react to the latest Arsenal news and get your thoughts in our live chat as well. As Arsenal not announced, but it is being reported that Arsenal are to move on from contract negotiator Huss Fahmy. Huss Fahmy, of course, joined the club a few years back and has supposedly completely renovated the whole conditions and ideas around contract negotiation, how Arsenal put together contracts, put together offers, and of course negotiate deals with players that would then come into the club. Now, we're going to have a quick look at Sam Dean on Twitter, who is a very good person to follow if you don't, in terms of getting Arsenal information. Make sure you are following over Sam. I don't know Sam. it's not a plug. He's my friend. No, it's not that. But Sam is good for this sort of stuff, working for the Telegraph. So he says that Huss Fahmy has left Arsenal as part of the ongoing restructuring at the club. And Fahmy is credited with modernising Arsenal's approach to contract negotiations, pushed for complex incentive-based deals, especially with younger players. And he was also crucial on a higher number of high-profile transfers and pretty much did the whole Saliba deal himself. So he was a big deal and he got a lot of stuff done for the club, in fairness, and it's a weird one. To be honest, in 100% truth, I don't know the ins and outs of how Huss Fahmy has sort of had a relationship with the club beyond being the contract negotiator. Arsenal are very secretive. It's very rare that genuine information gets brought out amongst the mainstream media, and I'm not aware of too much of the intricacies of his situation. However, what I would just through pure speculation is that if he's bringing in kind of these innovative ways of negotiating contracts, and that he's integrated in with Edu and with Vinay and all these, is that eventually, as an innovator of an idea in a very kind of communicative, collaborative, lots of people involved in contract negotiations and witnessing the way that Huss Fahmy deals with those. The thing with that is that Huss Fahmy's ideas and practices, the best things that he does, are able to be copied, are able to be regurgitated, to change, improve. And I feel that Arsenal will look at some of the good things that Huss Fahmy has done and they'll be able to replicate that. And then some of the things that maybe he is not so good at, and that's not saying there is anything, but from a purely speculative standpoint, looking at some of the things that he's maybe not so good at, they would be removed along with the man himself. And the most interesting thing about this story, I don't actually think, is Huss Fahmy leaving. Arsenal's streamlining a lot of their structure of people at the club, whether it was head of football Raul Sanyehi moving on, whether it was Francis Cajagao, whether it was part of the recruitment setup with Brian McDermott, etc., whether it was loads of others, whether it was Gunnosaurus that was being made redundant at the club. The thing that we know that is happening right now is that Arsenal are restructuring. Arsenal are streamlining. Arsenal are limiting the number of people that are involved. There are pros and cons to that. The cons to it are you have less ideas, you have less specialities, you have people that are more jack of all trades rather than specialists in different fields, and you have people doing multiple jobs. That's a disadvantage. However, the advantage is that there are less people involved between decision making. Decisions get made faster. There is less conflict. There is sort of, when you look at the way that Wenger kind of ran things, it was all very much him. Things still took a long time because Wenger, as we know, was someone that did stutter. There's someone that did think over things for a very long time. But what we have seen at the club is we've seen streamlining occurring where there will be now less decision makers involved in making a decision. Now, as Omar says there in the chat, you're not really sure what to make of this, to be honest. And Isowa says, so Arsenal got rid of the contract numbers guy. And it's just, it's not like, I wouldn't look at it as major news, and that's not the major story that I would think that comes from this. The major story is actually the second part of Sam's tweets where he says the club will be hiring a head of football operations, but they will not be as senior. Arteta, Edu, and Mertesacker are leading the football side of, and there's your buzzword, of the business. Now, make of that what you will. The interesting part, firstly, is that Arsenal are looking to get in another head of football operations, but it won't be as senior. Now, what that means is, effectively, is that they will have nowhere near the power that, say, Raul Sanllehi had when he was at the club, which is... It's interesting. I think maybe there was... I think from looking from sort of the outside in, it appeared to be that Raul Sanllehi got a hell of a lot of sort of power very, very quickly. Now, I don't know necessarily whether or not we will see the sort of the loss of Raul Sanllehi as a bad thing in the long term or as a good thing. It's still too early to know whether or not that is the case. However, the fact that we are bringing in someone to be a head of football operations, which is slightly different to a head of football, I think goes to show that the club has maybe lacked a little bit. But the fact that it's not going to be a senior role, it's not going to be up there with the Edu, it's not going to be working as critically as Raul Sanllehi was previously, maybe goes to show that we just need sort of someone to come in and head up many positions on kind of a I can do all of these jack of all trades kind of basis. And we can't afford at the club, whilst we're under these financial restrictions, be having high paid specialists in lots of different roles. And instead it would be better for the club to have one person in charge of multiple operations at the club, rather than one person on contract, one person on recruitment, one person on analysis. I know that it's not just one person, it would be loads, but you know what I'm saying. It's about streamlining, it's about cutting back, it's about trying to get people doing more things and there being less time to do the decision-making process between the people, but doesn't have to go through as many people before actually it gets made. And maybe that will increase the speed. Maybe it will decrease efficiency. It's a really hard one. I don't think anyone could jump on, any Arsenal YouTuber could jump on and just turn around and say, this is bad, this is good, because we don't know. We honestly don't know the impact that this is going to have in the long term. And we're still waiting to find out what the impact of that will be. And it's really interesting. It is really interesting, whilst we can't really have a pure matter-of-fact judgment. It's interesting. David Samuel says, hi Tom, who are actually making these decisions? Is it Edu? I'm confused with the level of positions we have at the club. Would it be Josh Kroenke making the decisions? It's a good question, David, and I'm not surprised that there's a little bit of sort of confusion around things. Now, when Raul Sanllehi left, Vinay Ventukasham kind of became the effective CEO of the club, kind of became Ivan Gazidis, if you like. Now, it's not to say that all of the roles and responsibilities are exactly the same. It's still not 100% clear to even me and others what the intricacies of his role are. But effectively, he has become the new Ivan Gazidis. Now, all decisions have to be okayed by Josh and Stan. Stan, obviously, he's the overriding owner. But as someone who's not an expert in football making decisions, that is why we've seen Josh get a lot more involved, a lot more sort of savvy around what the decision processes need to be, and become a lot more advised with things, because Stan will basically delegate a lot of that to Josh. So if Josh okays something, he's effectively okaying it on behalf of his dad. That's effectively how I'm interpreting it. If that is wrong, feel free to comment and let me know you're talking out your backside, Tom. But that's how I'm interpreting it, is that Josh is effectively an extension of his father into the club as a very senior role, as someone that is trying to become more integrated, learn more about the running of a football club, because his dad obviously has his fingers in so many different pies at the moment. So that's how I've interpreted it. But feel free to tell me if you are feeling differently. Now, in terms of how sort of the decisions get made, it's kind of being split at the moment. Before, it was very split. Before, you had Raul Sanllehi on the football side and you had Vinay on the commercial side. Vinay has now taken on both. and he's kind of overruling in sort of a leadership way. And then you have Edu, who is very much focused on the team, very much focused on nothing to do with business deals, nothing to do with sponsorship. He is all about the football and giving Arteta the arsenal that he needs in order to achieve what he wants to achieve with the club. And making Arteta manager rather than head coach has enabled Arteta to become a lot more ingrained and integrated into the runnings of the club. So it's less people doing more jobs, but kind of weirdly getting closer to how we were under Arsene Wenger. That's what's interesting, is that Arsene Wenger moved on. We had initially Ivan Gazidis, Sven Mislintat, Raul Sanllehi, and Vinay Ventukasham. Now, since then, and Huss Fahmy. So you've got lots of people in different roles, and you had a lot more of the big sort of scouting recruitment set up at the club. Now, weirdly, ever since, or as we've moved away from Arsene Wenger in terms of time, actually we've begun to get closer to what we used to have. Now, that may change how people's opinions are of, say, Arteta, for instance. A lot of people that I know that aren't so keen on the Arteta situation, I personally have a feeling that they kind of look at Arteta as the next Arsene Wenger, and when they were very detached to how Arsene Wenger was, that now looking like Arteta's having a very big control over things again as a manager, I don't think people kind of like that, seeing as how it ended up under Arsene Wenger. Now, I still believe that you need to give the guy time, that you need to give him this opportunity. Like, Arsenal were in a situation where they could have had, like, they could take a risk. They really could, bringing in Arteta. And we still don't really know how it's going to work out. Winning a trophy in his first 6 months is unprecedented and an unbelievable achievement. We don't know. But him having more control on the club goes to show you, I think, that the club see Arteta as a much more clear long-term option than they ever saw Unai Emery being. Now, Edu is there to kind of be that man that is going to enable Arteta to achieve everything that he can do, whilst understanding what is best for the club. During the summer, we saw that Sam Aouar was certainly a priority of Mikel Arteta, but maybe what we've seen now is that Edu, for instance, preferred and saw that the club maybe was in need of prioritising Thomas Partey in the long term over Aouar. Maybe that's because they thought they could get Aouar later and the opportunity to get Thomas Partey now was more critical. Maybe. But ultimately, Edu seemingly has more power than Arteta when it comes to making that final decision in the transfer market, which is okay, because I think it's important that a manager has that kind of person that is in charge over the top of them, and that you don't get it back into the Arsene Wenger situation where his word is final. So in my mind, I'm happy that this dynamic has taken place. RY says, Tom, is there any replacements that come to mind? Now, in terms of replacements, you look at what this situation is. We aren't seeing necessarily a replacement for Raul Sanllehi coming in. I imagine, and this is pure, again, this is complete theory, but the person that comes in as the head of football operations isn't going to be some like Ralf Rangnick. If it ends up being Ralf Rangnick, amazing, because that's someone amazingly talented. But I don't see it being someone of that caliber coming in. I see it as someone who's maybe at a smaller club right now that's just sort of moves across, takes that step up to that head of football operations kind of role. We've spoken previously to head of football operations on the channel. We spoke to David Webb, who was the former head of football operations at Huddersfield Town. He's the guy that brokered the Emile Smith-Rowe loan deal. So if you tweet David, he's available on Twitter. You can find him. If you've got any questions about how maybe the head of football operations role goes down, speak to him. Maybe we'll have to get back him on the channel and ask a few more questions. But it's replacements in terms of come to mind. It's not on me to turn around and say that we should be looking at this guy, we should be looking at that guy, because if it was up to me, I'd be going, let's go get someone of the caliber of Ralf Rangnick. Anyone of that sort of expertise and talent, and someone that has a vision to kind of bring in young players, great. That's fantastic. But ultimately, Arsenal aren't going to be doing that in my mind. They're going to be looking at someone younger or someone that's already ingrained in a football position at a smaller club that has shown real potential to kind of do multiple jobs at once and have multiple responsibilities and do them really well, that now can step that up to a big club like Arsenal. So I don't think it's going to be necessarily a big name, in my opinion, that's going to come in. I don't see that. If it does happen, great, but I just don't see that the way that it's going to happen. Philip Bevan says it seems like only at Arsenal do we focus on who is doing what behind the scenes. I get we've not been good enough in all areas, but do we worry about this too much? Now, Philip, maybe, and now I'm making a complete assumption about you and much of the fan base, but of course, as Arsenal fans, we find ourselves much more ingrained with our own club, and we obviously follow people on Twitter and social media, and we speak to people within the sort of sphere of Arsenal, and maybe that's why we feel and we perceive things in a way that we are ultimately doing more behind the scenes. Now, if you're a United fan or a Chelsea fan or a Liverpool fan, you may think that about your club because you obviously look and get more information about that fed to you. And I certainly see that the way it goes. So I don't think maybe, Philip, that at Arsenal we focus on who is doing what too much. Arsenal are in a very kind of, even in a weird way, as one of the oldest clubs around, we still look to be in a very juvenile stage with how things are going on. We've got a very young core of people in senior roles. Vinay is still very young. Edu is still very young. Arteta as our coach. Steve Bold, Per Mertesacker, less so Steve Bold, but Per Mertesacker, head of the academy. But we've got some very young people, and we are still kind of changing things. Now, who would have been the perfect guy to come in to be sort of that Edu role for me would have been Monchi, as Tashi says there. Now, Monchi could have come to Arsenal. Sevilla came along, gave him an offer, a nostalgic offer, something that he has a connection already with the club, and they took him. If we'd have got Monchi in the club, I thought it could have been amazing. He had mixed kind of results at Roma. Things went well in some places. Some signings didn't go so well. So for me, Monchi would have been great. It would have been an amazing experiment to see if it would have worked. I don't think that it's worth lingering on that now. But ultimately, the changes behind the scenes at Arsenal are always, in my opinion, going to be something that's hopefully done to improve things at the club. So that's just how I see it. I don't necessarily think it's something that you need to worry too much about at this stage. I certainly don't think it's something that you look at in terms of a worrying sign, if that makes sense. I think it's something that you look at in terms of, let me just block this Spurs fan in the chat. See you later. In terms of like, oh my God, there's so much chaos going on behind the scenes at Arsenal that now we need to worry about what's going on. But it's just, I think that it's going to cause a lot of chaos on social media. I think you're going to see a lot of people going, look at this, Arsenal's changing things again, when really it's not too much that we need to be concerned about. Gave me some content for the day, though, of course, which is great. I've got about 5 more minutes before I'm going to wrap up, so if you've got any specific questions, please make sure you throw them into the chat box. And as Nico, our good friend Nico in the chat says, let's smash those likes. Boys and girls that are watching, thank you ever so much for tuning in. So make sure that you do click that like button. Much appreciate it. Owen, always a pleasure to have you on in the chat box. Of course, Owen was on over at ABW yesterday. If you want to go and check out some other Arsenal content, ABW is a fantastic place to do that with Danny and the boys. Also, if you haven't seen it, and I know we've got memberships on the channel, if you want to join us and get access to some exclusive content, then great. We'd love to have you on board and getting all that content. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get round to an expert interview this month. I'm going to try and get something in the next couple of days. But of course, getting the new job this month has really kind of scaled up my timeline of things. But if you haven't gone and checked out Danny's video on a Burkout Wonderland about the promotion of their membership system, it's comedy gold. So make sure you go and check it out. But yeah, make sure you go and check out those guys. And of course, Owen has his own channel too, at Gooner Crack. So make sure you check that out as well. And this guy, he's got a channel. It must be out. It's always out. It's the only one I like. So, and Mike, of course. So check out the Gooners pod as well. But he says, without Huss Fahmy, we'd have lost 2-0 to Leicester instead of 1. Exactly. If we hadn't have had Huss Fahmy, we'd have clearly, maybe even, I think we would have beaten him. I'm going to disagree with you, Mike. I think if Huss Fahmy would have been sacked early, we would have easily beaten Leicester. Silly at this point. Certified Boss Brown says, hey Tom, do you think we can ever challenge for major honours under this ownership? Good question. Tough question. Do I think we can challenge? It's at the end of the day, Boss Brown, it's football, and anyone can ultimately win anything in this team. We have competed for top honours. The FA Cup, to me, is a major honour. It's the biggest domestic cup competition in the world, and Arsenal have won it more than any other team. That is challenging still for an honour. I know what you're saying, though. You want to be winning the Premier League. You want to be winning the Champions League. Can we realistically, when you look at the amount of money that's spent by Manchester City, by Liverpool on players because they have the investment of their ownership, and FFP just turns a blind eye to the likes of City's horrific use of finances. And when you look at how well other clubs in other countries like Bayern Munich are run, you look at how much money can be spent by Barcelona, really badly at times, but still they manage it. And annoyingly, they're starting to turn things around and sign some better young players, bring some better players through like Ansu Fati, sign some young players from other Spanish teams like Pedri, who came from Las Palmas. Then that's annoying to see that things are going so well for them. In the long term, maybe. In the short term, I'm doubting it right now. And I don't think it matters what coach is in charge. You can turn around and say that Arteta's out his depth. You can say that we could, because I think you could pick up Pep Guardiola, you could pick up Jose Mourinho, you could pick up whoever you like and plonk them down with this set of squad, set of players, set of owners that we've got. You're not going to see too many getting any much more than we're seeing out of Arteta right now. That's for darn sure. So we've done the right thing in removing someone like Unai Emery, which really kind of did restrict the ceiling that the club has, but I don't think there's too many other coaches, if any, that could be taken into this club right now and take it further than what it's doing with the restrictions of our ownership, with the restrictions of our squad, with the restrictions that are just surrounding the club as a whole as it continues to transition away from Arsene Wenger's departure, which seems an eternity ago, but in reality and in football terms, it really isn't. So we compete in terms of it being football, and anything can happen in football. But if you want to be on the level of City and Liverpool, and if that's the level that you're talking about, then no, it's just not going to happen. Peace Tempo says, what do you think should be the target for Arteta this season? If he fails to achieve that, would you sack him? As I said, I kind of goes back to the last point I said. It's if you sack Arteta, say the target this season should be Champions League, and with the way that teams around us are dropping points, there's no reason to say that we couldn't go for Champions League this season. If he doesn't get Champions League, do you sack him? Do you sack a manager that won you an FA Cup in 6 months? Do you sack a manager that has arguably improved a lot of the players in the squad? Do you sack a manager that has taken the worst thing about this team, which was us defensively, and solve a lot of those problems? There are still some problems, but solve a lot of those problems. Do you sack him? I don't think so. I don't think you do at this point. I think you have to give it time. If it turns out that you start seeing the decline that we saw under Unai Emery, then the question changes. And for sure, then you have to consider things. But Arsenal are not declining right now. They've had to make some sacrifices, certainly, in the way that they attack in games, by going to this 3-4-3 system and by becoming a little bit more defensive to try and shore up that. But what really annoys me sometimes, genuinely, what really annoys me is that people are willing to throw away Arteta immediately and say that he's out of his depth and kind of buy into some of the hyperbolic personalities that you see around here. Unfortunately, that they're willing to throw that away when they're not actually looking at the improvements that have been made. Like Arsenal defensively was so poor. And like the game against Leicester, Leicester have kind of had Arsenal's number for a long time. But the thing is, we went to the King Power Stadium under Unai Emery and we were outplayed. Like Leicester were the better side, they bossed us. The game against Leicester at home this season, Arsenal were the dominant side. They didn't take their chances. And we can talk about creativity all day long, but ultimately we created 11 chances in the first half alone, and we didn't take them. Lacazette had missed a clear chance of his head. He actually scored one, in fairness to him, and it was wrongly disallowed, which would have changed the game entirely. But we were the bigger team in that game, and we were unlucky, of course, not to pick up all 3 points. We've changed the way we play. Defensively, we're more solid. We just now need to get that balance right, because we've shifted from being a really offensive side with a weak back line to one which has a stronger back line, but ultimately is a little bit toothless up top. And I think that's the biggest problem right now, is that we need to get that balance back. And I think it's going to take a transfer window in the summer, personally. I don't think you're going to see it this season. I think it's going to take more investment. It's going to need better players coming in. It's going to see better improvement from some of the young players coming through. It's going to need Saka to step up. It's going to need Emil Smith-Rowe to step up. It's going to see Martinelli hopefully come back and be an absolute boss. It's going to need a lot of things to happen. But Arteta has improved the biggest problem at the club, which was our defensive insecurities and frailties and vulnerabilities. He's improved that massively. but it has been at a cost of how efficient we are in the forward line. And ultimately, that could come back to bite us in the arse. But we'll just have to wait and see. Thapan Roy says Awar or Jobbersley, which, I mean, I'll give you credit. It is a very different, it's a very difficult name to spell. That's how you spell it, though. I've put it in the chat. If I've spelled it wrong now, I look like a right fool. I'd pick Jobbersley in terms of financial side of things. Awar right now is a better player, probably. It's really hard because the thing with Jobbersley is that I watch him a lot in the Austrian Bundesliga, and Rebel Salzburg dominates so many of those games that it becomes a problem to really have many sort of case examples. The best way to look at a player that's playing in a league like that in such a dominant side is to see how they perform on the European stage. And the thing about Jobbersley is that he's performed so well on the European stage, scoring some great goals against Atletico, against Lokomotiv last couple of seasons, setting up goals against the likes of Napoli as they get beaten by Salzburg. So he's done it on the big stage. Can he do it consistently for a big club in a big league? I have all the hope in the world that he can. But the thing about if you were to say sign Awar now, he's already doing it in Liga. He's doing it in the French national team, getting called up for that. The problems, I still trust a lot of what, say, Jeremy Smith, who is a fantastic French football expert. I have a lot of faith in what he says and how he speaks about French football. And I also have a lot of faith in what Chris Carpenter says about French football, and they kind of disagree in certain areas about Awar. I'd lean a little bit more towards the way Jeremy's talking about him because I know how much Chris loves Awar, and I know how much I love Jobbersley, and I'm very well aware of how bias can impact your judgment of players sometimes. I'm very guilty of it with my love of La Liga, but I think that Awar, if you were to be able to get him for a good price, is probably the most sensible option. However, if you're not able to get Awar for less than, say, for around 40 million euros, at a push 45, then I think you have to go out and say you've got Dominic Jobbersley, who's going to be one of the hottest talents in Europe, which is his supposed release clause, and have a real punt at him. It's a good question though, Thapan, and it's a really difficult one to answer, and I hope I've given you the best possible one that I could. Last question then, before we wrap up. Tom says, PSG and Real already said they were keen on Awar for next summer. They're bound to outbid us anyway, even if we went for them, which is a good point. And it's very unlikely that now that Arsenal didn't get Awar this summer, that we would get him in the future, because he clearly wants to go to a big club in Champions League. And the only way I see us getting Awar is by being in the Champions League, to be honest. He chose to remain at Lyon. I know that we didn't really go in for him in the end. If you believe the reports, Edu prioritised Partey, which I'm buzzing about. I would have preferred to bring in Partey, don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it, to talk about Awar, because in the long term, I don't see him as an Arsenal player now. I really thought he could have been, but I don't see it as much now. Anyway, that's going to wrap up today's show, people. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you could drop a like on the video, I'd really genuinely appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the shows that we put out yesterday, looking at Jobbersley and Patson Daka and some of the other young players that could be being linked to Arsenal, who I think maybe we should be targeting. And thank you for the comments on the videos. I read through as many of them and reply to them as many of them as possible. Some people leave absolute essays, which makes it very hard to read through. So the shorter the comments, the better. But I do still try to read through a lot of your comments, and I appreciate all the kind words that you give us over here. We will be back tomorrow to talk about Manchester United in the preview show at 7 o'clock this evening. I'm on another channel. I'll be retweeting them. So if you want to see some more words from me on Manchester United, I'm going to be over there a little bit later. So that should be fun. But other than that, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, as it always is. And I'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.